being announced. Great. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Zara Phillips. Zara was born and raised in London. Zara is an adoptee, an author, performer, singer-songwriter, and activist. Her acclaimed works include Mother Me, Somebody's Daughter, and the song I'm Legit, co-written and performed with Daryl McDaniels of Run DMC. She has also written a 30-minute documentary called Roots Unknown, an adoption film, which is the winner of the Garden State Film Festival's Best Short Homegrown Documentary, and the one-woman show Beneath My Father's Sky, which is the winner of the United Solo Festival's Best Direction Award. Zara explores the complexities of relationships and explores the theme of connection and healing through her music writing, facilitating workshops. And she has presented across the UK and States on adoption topics. I'll put links to Zara's website and work in the chat. And Zara, thank you for being here. We're super happy to have you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see faces. And I'm always glad to come back to Adoption Network. You know, I love all the work that you do, and it's just so important still to keep educating and bring people together in the community. I always think there's a lot to be done. And, you know, for those that don't know me, I'm not a therapist or a psychiatrist. I am an adoptee who, you know, really my work is through writing and performance, and I've had to do a lot of looking at myself, a lot of inward work over the years, and I've been very lucky, really, when I came into the adoption world, to have connected with so many people and groups and organizations going way back that absolutely changed my life, really. There's no doubt about it. I love to talk about adoption and addiction as somebody who is in recovery. So a lot of what I talk about is my own personal experience, but I've also, over the years, because I've been around now I can say I've been around for years. It's like, wow, where did the time go? I've met a lot of adopted people who have struggled with addiction, and other members of the triad too. Obviously, you know, I mean, I've met many birth parents too that have struggled with addiction, alcoholism, etc. But obviously, I can only talk from my perspective as an adoptee. And I was looking earlier at the, you know, the information about the talk, and just thinking I want to make sure I cover everything. And you know, one of the points is why do we think adopted people struggle so much with addiction? And I don't know, I can give you my theory or give you my own personal experience. You know, interestingly enough, there is not a lot of information or studies out there about adoptees with addiction. I do know a man in England who's really worth checking out called Paul Sunderland, who had a practice which was for addicts, you know, anyone with addiction problems. And he knew nothing about adoption, but he said that as more people, all these people are showing up, young people, he realized that over half of his clients were adopted. And he began to think, hold on a minute, something's going on here. And that's when he investigated much more into the adoption experience. And he has some wonderful talks. There's a talk he does on adoption and addiction. And I actually did a talk with him not long ago, hopefully will be on YouTube at some point. You know, I mean, I can tell you the intellectual, I'll talk from the intellectual brain and tell you my emotional story. But, you know, we know that babies, when they're separated, the brain chemistry changes when they're separated from their mother. The serotonin levels, which are there to make you happy and change, are lowered. If the baby doesn't get the skin to skin, you know, when a baby's born and they lie on the mother, all these synapses go off in the brain, which make things work. I mean, I'm so not a brain person, but I mean, that's the simplest way to describe it. And if this brain is not fired off correctly, there's an imbalance. And that's really a simple way to understand it. So for me, I believe, and from my experience too, that addiction is really to help balance the brain. And of course, adopted people who are lacking with basic chemicals to make you happy and not depressed are going to seek out something to change the brain chemistry. And to me, it's quite interesting what human beings do. You know, they say that the addict is drawn to a specific drug, like if you want cocaine, it's because you need to up the brain chemistry in that way. If it's heroin, it's because there's another imbalance in the brain. So humans are sort of, it's like survival, actually, addiction. But of course, it's killing you. So, you know, what do you do with that? I know for me, from a very young child, I remember feeling deep, heavy depression and not being able to express it. I was adopted in England as a baby in the 60s, you know, and people know from that time, my adopted mother was just told, love the baby. Everything's going to be fine. You just love it as if it's your own. The end. Baby doesn't need to know anything more. My mother was infertile, had miscarriages, was never allowed to grieve the loss of what that meant as a woman. And I absolutely know that affected her whole life. We couldn't we couldn't fix her infertility. Yes, we could make her a mother. I also have a brother that was adopted, but we couldn't fix that. But who knew? You know, what does a child know? And so really I was raised, and my father was a judge, right? British, you know, does not talk about emotions and actually really didn't speak. My mother was the one that did all the interaction. And I think, you know, my parents were in denial of adoption, on the reality of it, and addiction. So for me as a young child, I really struggled with depression and lived a lot in fantasy, lost in books, really in fantasy land. Was good at writing from a young age. I was writing poems and stories like and they were always about some, you know, young person overcoming these huge obstacles. You know, I look back now, it's quite interesting. And I remember a teacher saying, that's a very heavy topic for a child your age. And, you know, I read Helen Keller. I was obsessed with Helen Keller. No idea that I was trying to, you know, find myself, or, you know, looking at this girl that was deaf and dumb and blind, and Helen Keller's teacher who supported her. So, I mean, all the signs were there. It was like the textbook, if you like, adoptee. And the terrible anxiety, could not stay away overnight at people's houses. And if I did, would literally have that panic, which I now know is probably the baby feeling of the separation. And I didn't understand it. And I was embarrassed and full of shame that you know, what was wrong with me? My friends could stay the night. Why would I have terror, literally feel terror? And my mother would lose patience. So there was not a lot of talk about any of this when I was younger. And, you know, my brother was 2 years, is 2 years older than me, and was the one that acted out. So he was the one, you're not my mother, you know, he stole. I mean, he was going to shops, he stole so much stuff. Again, textbooks, a lot of adoptees steal. I did stealing a bit later on, but it's because we feel stolen, or so I read. So anyway, he was behaving that way, and drugs were coming into our house. And by the time I was 15, my brother was a heroin addict in our house. You know, you have to imagine my parents, I mean, I have 3 kids, and it really, whenever I tell this story, I'm like, seriously? Your son's on heroin. Hello. Does anybody notice what's going on? And no, they absolutely chose not to. So that's the kind of family, just to let you know, there are only 4 of us living in this house, and the dog, 2 dogs. Dogs probably knew more than the parents, I have a feeling. So my feeling, and my brother was verbally abusive, physically abusive towards me. I was the easy target, really. And it was hell. Living in the house was hell. Living with him was hell. And again, I played the role, the good adoptee, didn't say anything, was scared, a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety. So, but that changed, and I really have been thinking about, as I was preparing to do the talk, how is the addiction for me? How does it cross over? Is my relationship with my adopted mother was so difficult. I had so much rage within me. I think what happened was it was easier to feel rage, and I think it is for many, than it is to really feel the vulnerability. And I feel that if the vulnerability and the grief, which for me is all of this, adoption is formed from grief, from loss. There's no other way that adoption is formed. The adoptee always arrives with loss of their birth family, birth mother. The adopted parent, maybe they've had their own biological child, but if they haven't, they're starting the adoption process from loss, from grief. And the birth mother, we know, has grief. So adoption is formed from grief. And most of the time, and even still today, people don't want to see that there's grief. They want to say, isn't it fantastic? You must feel so lucky. And I remember as a little kid, smiling, thinking, I don't feel lucky. I don't feel grateful, but better not let these people know, because they might send me back. So I think what happened is my rage began to happen. And Nancy Verrier in The Primal Wound really talks about the rage the adoptee can have towards the adoptive mother. And I feel for you, if there's any adopted parents here, I do feel for you, because my goodness, do we test? And if you're not aware, it must be, I have 3 kids. I mean, I know the challenges anyway of teens and all of that you go through, but to have an adopted child, teenager, full of grief and anxiety, who is going to, and that was me. I pushed and I pushed and I pushed, and I was, my mother didn't reject me, but she couldn't cope. She didn't have the tools to cope. And what I learned from Nancy Verrier, who was really helpful to me when I first started doing the work around this, was that it wasn't my fault that I wasn't the right daughter for my mother. It wasn't my fault. I blamed myself for not connecting with my mother. And what I learned over the years too is the adopted parent they're so excited to have a baby finally. So they're coming to the baby with all this excitement and love and, hope. And the baby is coming like, where's my mom? Who are you? And there's 2 different experiences happening. And I think that all of these things have to be looked at and addressed. And I don't know how you do that. Babies need to grieve. Babies grieve, and they store the memory. It's like a cellular memory, and it's stored because, this trauma, which I know it is a trauma, happened before there were words. So how would an adopted parent know? The baby will smile back. The baby will eventually seem to attach, because you have to. You've got to survive. Babies are also very smart in that way. So there's all these layers going on. And then there's a family trying to act like a normal family with all of these unspoken things, or, not known things. And for me, my rage became unbearable. And I do think now, I have many years of sobriety now, so it's interesting how as the years go, you get like more of a perspective on things. And I think for me, that the drugs and alcohol were the only way that I could cope with the rage, just to function, because I thought I was going to do crazy things. I felt so rageful, and would have really terrible rageful outbursts to the police, in the street, oh my goodness. And and not understanding, like, what is this monster? It felt like a monster inside me, and so much anger towards my adopted mother, because I wanted her to read my mind, and she couldn't. And I know that as a mother, we can't read our kids' minds, but and I've also learned over the years that sometimes, where, you know, the anger can be like, you are blocking me from my birth mother. I don't know whether that was my thought. All I know was everything was directed at my adopted mother. And I think it was, take away this pain. You need to take it away. And she couldn't take it away. And somebody like my mother, who did no work on herself at all either, she was like, what is going on? You know? So for me, I really do believe the drugs and alcohol, and they took away the anxiety. They took away, suddenly I was staying over everywhere at everybody's house, places I shouldn't be staying, and I'm walking these streets in London, these really dodgy areas, and I'm hanging out with other heroin addicts in denial. Oh, well, I do cocaine, ecstasy, speed, but I don't do heroin, so I'm not an addict. I mean, that's what I convinced myself, and I'm not living under a bridge, you know, with the other alcoholics in London, so I'm not an alcoholic. And I absolutely believe that story. And I would act out sexually. I think I hear that's quite common with adoptees. No sort of fear of consequence, no thought of consequence of what was going to happen, and no real care, and no self-love, no self-esteem, didn't know what I looked like. Was I pretty? Was I not pretty? I mean, absolutely clueless. And that's how I went through my life. And then my brother got arrested for heroin possession. And that's sort of when things began to turn. He gets arrested, and the treatment, they put him in treatment, and they recommend that we should go and get help as a family. But of course, my mum, you know, she was like, well, I didn't know what was happening, so I don't need to get help. It's like, So I went to my first 12-step meeting. If anyone's familiar with 12-step program, there's lots of different groups these days. There's tons. And the group I went to was for families that had addicts. And I went to this group in denial that I was an addict to tool myself, but finally here, and I was 19 years of age, with the weight of the world, anger, you know, just a heaviness. And I heard people talk about, you know, they talked about all the things I'd hidden and kept so quiet because I was so ashamed, and I was scared because my brother was like, if you tell anyone, I will kill you. And he almost did, you know, very, very violent with his own adoption stuff. And I actually do remember them saying in the treatment center that my parents needed to look at you know, the adoption experience. I know someone's trying to direct message me right now, but I think we're going to do that afterwards. And it's best to just put all the questions for everybody. So, and I'm happy to answer them all. Anyway, because I don't have a lot of time, I ended up getting sober at 22. And, you know, these meetings that I was showing up to at 19 was the doorway for me. I was not ready at 19, and I kept showing up, you know, every few months because I was drawn to it, but I was scared. And then when I was 22, I finally went to Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and I got sober. I was very, very lucky to have a really amazing group of young people. In the day in England, there were all these young people in AA that basically surrounded me and supported me. When I was 4 months sober, and I was ready, I sort of knew I was in a bad way. It was almost like, you either get sober or you die. You know, somebody said that to me, and for some reason I heard it that day. That's like a kind of spiritual awakening moment, whereas people probably said it before, but I wasn't interested. But that day I heard it, and I had a very profound experience, and I was like, I want to live. I want to live. And within 4 months of me getting sober, I knew I needed to find my birth mother. It was as clear as day. How could I go forward when I didn't know anything? I had no history. I had no story. My story was, your mother was young. That was it. That was my story. So I explored that. I found my birth mother. It was, you know, I mean, in a way, we can have a whole talk just on reunion, because that is, you know, that's a whole complex thing, right, as everybody knows. And I met her, and a brother and a sister from her, and I learned my story. 16, by some Italian man in London that she did not know, Jewish. Nice Jewish girls don't get pregnant at 16, especially by Italian men that they do not know. So she was put in hiding, and I was put in foster care, and all the stuff that was done in the 60s. But, you know, it helped, but I hadn't done the work. So here I am now sober, and I'm suddenly with my birth mother, and all the primal feelings are coming up. And this time I have no drug or alcohol to push it down. I even stopped smoking cigarettes, I think, not long after. And what did I do with all of this? That had to go somewhere. And I still wasn't doing the work really around adoption, because AA and NA is to stay sober. It's not about adoption. So I found my people within the 12-step program, and a few years. So I was 22. By the time I was 29, I couldn't cope with these two relationships that I was having in England, where the mothers were not meeting, and I left and I came to America. I said to do music, but honestly, I can tell you it's because I couldn't cope. I couldn't people please, keep everybody happy. And so off I went to America, which gave me the space to then go to adoption conferences and really start doing the work around my experience as an adoptee. And for me, it has been so much about grief and loss, and allowing myself to grieve every aspect of it. That's really what I was carrying within me for so long. Addiction, the self-love, and I think I saw something when the message flashed up. You know, for me, I remember somebody saying to me, compassion to self goes a long way. And I'm like, well, what the hell are you talking about? Compassion to self? I realized how hard I was on myself, rigid. I mean, I would never talk to somebody the way I talk to myself, my inner voice. So it wasn't really just about, you know, you can put down the drugs and the alcohol, but now the work really has to begin. How do I deal with this critical, negative, horrible voice? And I remember when I had children thinking, I would never talk to my kids that way. I would do everything to build them up. So the self-love has really been simple to begin with. As an addict in recovery, they say, have you eaten today? Have you got enough sleep? Are you cold? Are you hungry? Basic things like that, that I still to this day, if I'm feeling a little off balance, will go, have you connected with, you know, people today? Have you eaten? Da, 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 da. Go through the list. That's just a basic thing that I start with. And doing acts of, you know, kindness to oneself. Just doing those acts towards will lead to more acts. And really just letting people see who I am, and sharing the experience has just been so tremendously helpful. I could not stay sober without being completely honest about what's going on with me. For me, recovery is about staying honest, because I think once we start getting those secrets again, and no shame to say, here I am, you know, I'm 35 years sober. I still have days when I don't want to be nice to myself. I still have days when I want to act out, and that old voice will come, and I know where it will take me. But I kind of think, but I understand it more. There was one, I mean, I had been looking about studies done for adoptees and addicts. There's one in Minnesota. There was only like one where they found that adoptees were 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than their peers. that was me. I mean, I didn't attempt, you know, I didn't realize that I was always sort of trying to kill myself. So I think it's the annihilation of just the pain, honestly, that it all becomes so much, and the fragmentation of having all these relationships, and who am I? Who am I? Who am I? I'm aware of time, but I just want to say that I did end up meeting my birth father in my 50s, only a few years ago, via Ancestry DNA. He was living 1 hour away from me. He's from Rome, I'm from London, and we were both living in New Jersey, 1 hour away from each other. And I have loads of siblings from his side, some American, some English. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years after I found him. We had a fantastic connection. It really was just very, very powerful. And my adopted dad and him died 9 months apart. It was hard. So, you know, the lifelong impact of adoption, it never goes away. Here I was again in my 50s, after dealing with a reunion in my 20s, thinking, well, I should know how, I'm an expert. I've met all these parents. Well, here I am again, lying on the bed going, I can't function because of the grief. But the difference is, I know what it is. I know that I'll get through it. And I know I just have to allow it to happen. I don't have to run out there and use something to take away that feeling, even though the feeling feels like death. You know, as I'm sure many of you know, when you're in that terrible pain, it feels like, oh my God, I can't get through it. But I have enough faith today to say, you know what, I can get through it. No human being wants to feel uncomfortable, but if I allow it, it's going to heal quicker than if I run off on the streets again. And then there's one quote that I wanted to, you know, there's so much honestly to talk about. I feel like I'm just cramming everything in half an hour, but I want other people to, you know, to open this up. But I love this BJ Lifton from Journey of the Adopted Self. And she says she believes adoptees draw their identities from both sides of the relinquishment and adoption. She maintains this is the lifelong experience of the adopted person. The complex difficulty of living with two sets of parents is never fully resolved into an experience of wholeness. It is a split life that is managed and lived with, but not resolved into oneness. And for me, it really has felt like a split life in all ways. And interesting that I came to America and I still, you know, maybe it's comfortable for me to live in two countries. It's interesting. I think about that. But then I found out I have a sister who's American that's adopted. So, you know, there was definitely a pull here. Anyway, I've had kids, I've been divorced, I'm now remarried. You know, there's so much to, we could do like a workshop on every single topic. And adoptees seem to get divorced a lot, I hate to say. Maybe not surprising, but anyway, please ask as many questions as you like. Thank you so much for letting me share.
Thank you, Zara.
Thank you.
Shall I look in the chat at the how are we going to do the questions?
Well, no one had messaged me with any
Okay.
questions at this point, but if anyone...
Somebody said K direct messaged me, said, how did you find self-love from being an addict? I hope that I answered that question. Did I answer that question? I feel like I did, but if you want to know more, then, you know, please ask. Okay. And if you want me to go deeper into any part of the story that I sort of skimmed, or, you know, then we can absolutely do that as well.
We had a comment in the chat. My teen has a lot of rage and we're trying to address it with her. Could you talk a little bit about maybe some strategies or some ways we can support teens who are in that rage place?
Well, I think what's hard, I mean, I've done a lot of stuff with teens actually, because I used to go into this school where a lot of them were adopted, and they put on these weekends because they knew that these families were experiencing a lot of that. I think I think the teen, they do rage against the parents. They do, as Nancy Verrier really, if you've ever read The Primal Wound, she really talks about that. So I think it is a big challenge as an adopted parent. And I don't necessarily think that, I think the teen needs to go somewhere else to talk about the rage, because I think it's very hard to be really honest with the adopted parent sometimes exactly how you feel. So if that is, and really talking to them about the self, the self-love piece is so important, because the danger with the rage is that we turn it inward. And I think the thing is, as children, as little children always think it's them because they're self-centered. That's the way children are supposed to be. So, if you think your mother doesn't love you, then there must be something wrong with me. And it could, I don't know why your teen is feeling rageful. I know a lot of adoptees do, but I think it's the grief. They always say what we're showing at the front is what's, turn it around, and what's underneath it all is they're not quite ready to show the pain. It's much easier to be angry than it is to sit and cry. So, maybe there's other groups they can go to, or you can find other adoptive parents or therapists to work with around it. And just be aware, it's like you shouldn't have to tolerate if your teen's being abusive to you. Absolutely not. It's not for the adoptive parent to go, just, I'll take it, or there has to be boundaries. In fact, that's really what they're crying out for. But it's also for them to hear, are you sad? I see all this anger, but I'm wondering, maybe you feel sad. And even just saying that could possibly get them, and they might at first be like, of course, I'm not sad, I'm angry, but they might think about it. Are we going? I can't hear you, Ty, if you're.
Someone had asked if you could share the quote that you
I'll have to type
it.
Yeah, but I could do that at the end. But
was that from The Primal Wound?
That's from BJ Lifton. It's from it's Journey of the Adopted Self. It's really worth getting that book anyway.
Wonderful. So I'll look for that while we're talking. And then the next question was, do you think healing from abandonment issues is common for a lot of adoptees?
What, that you can heal? I think healing. I mean, I don't really know. I think I'm not really understanding the question. Do you think healing from abandonment issues is common?
Sure. Bianca, did you want to come off mute and share a little bit about?
Sure. Sorry. So my mother is an adoptee. She was adopted. Her and her twin sister were adopted. One of the twins did struggle with addiction.
Mm-hmm.
But my mother, her biggest struggle in her parenting was abandonment. So unfortunately, me as her daughter, she kind of abandoned me as a teenager, right? And wasn't able to show up for me emotionally, or just wasn't able to show up anymore. And I'm wondering, like, do you feel like that comes from that maybe that feeling of abandonment or whatever that she experienced as an adoptee?
Yeah, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. I mean, it could very well be, it's hard to know. Obviously, I don't know your mother, but I do think, I've heard adoptees talk a lot about parenting. And actually, my daughter was on a panel of being a child of an adoptee, that adoption mosaic. actually do. You could probably look that up. They'll probably have that video somewhere. I can write that in. You know, I think it just depends. I mean, I think some adoptees feel they can't be good parents because of their experience. It could be that. And, you know, my parenting was over the top, you know, so we can come at it a different way. I had to nurse them for years and sleep with them and attachment parenting, you know, and you know, eventually they're like, Mom, we are okay. So it could be, well, that your mother, or maybe it was just painful for your mother around that. It triggered something in her, the age you were at or what you needed. It's hard to say, but to me, I do feel that most things do stem from the adoption. If it's not been addressed,
Right.
how could you not pass it on? You know, it's sort of impossible, really, isn't it?
Right.
But
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry that you had to experience that.
Yeah, and it's something that I'm healing, like in my own
Oh, I'm
journey.
sure. Yeah, we pass on our stuff, and it's every mother does, you know, but then you get the double whammy with the generational abandonment stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then Tina's following up with wondering if you could speak a bit about your family and the experience and effects of your reunions on your children, and have they been able to form relationships with biological family?
Well, I'm assuming you're meaning all about just bio family. My adopted parents now have passed away, both of them. And my kids, obviously, they knew my adopted parents, but my mum died quite a few years ago now, so they were little. But they've always known my birth mother, because I met my birth mother before I had kids. And, you know, to them, in a way, it's sort of normal. For us, they know my birth mother. She sends them birthday cards. She's very young in her ways. And, you know, I think they find the whole thing, as they've got older, they understand more what it's all about. And I have a sister and who now has a child, and a brother who has a couple of kids. So yes, but, you know, the distance sometimes difficult, obviously. My kids are all in America and they're all in England, but they see them whenever we go over. My biological father did get to meet both my daughters, which was wonderful. And I think they were really excited and wanted to continue this relationship. And then his wife, you know, completely cut us out. But I have sibling, when he died, she was like, that's it. We don't want to know you anymore. And so they see the effects of that. They saw the effect of that on me, and they were there. They were there with me when I met a brother for the first time. We were all in the car together in England, and it was amazing having them with me, because I was like, oh my God, you know, and they're like, come on, Mum. And they were there the first time I spoke to my birth father. You know, we were in a restaurant. I said, he's going to phone. And they're like, go outside. It's okay. You know, and they're like watching from the window. So I definitely feel their support, but I feel sad that, you know, none of these relationships have really been whole for them either. But my siblings, some of my siblings, again, some in America, some in England, you know, the distance doesn't help, but definitely they know who they are. And who knows, they have children. My sister and I have kids and another brother. They're all the same ages, similar interests. So they have got to meet, and they immediately hit it off. So I really hope for more of those moving forward.
And another question, have you maintained contact with your adoptive brother?
I have very little contact with him, sadly, just through choice. And also, I suppose he's pulled away too, but he's just not very healthy. So he's not good for me to be around. Sometimes I find myself, you know, when my dad died, which was only 4 years ago, there was more communication. But then when you know, my brother is still a practicing addict. I mean, he's not on heroin, but when it comes to money, you know, it's kind of a dangerous thing too. And And it just gets very, what's the word? A lot of families get like that when somebody dies and there's money involved. But if you have an addict, active addict, adoptee, you know, can create dramas. So I do find myself texting him. It's funny, even my husband recently was like, why do you even text him? And there's still a part of me that just wants to know, I wonder if he's alive. Like, what's happened? He has no relationships really, you know, has never had, because of the way he's lived. And I wonder, he always went home every few years, would always go, and so I do wonder sometimes, like, what is really going to happen to him. But it's not healthy, so, you know, I'll dip in.
And then Tim had also asked in the chat, inquiring about birth order and compliance. You know, is the first adoptee usually compliant and the next the one who acts out, or, you know, in your case, the opposite? Have you noticed any patterns of that?
Trying to think. I mean, I don't really know with birth order. I don't know if it's birth order, but I definitely do think in most families there's the compliant and the acting out. There's no doubt. It's interesting though, I don't know about if there's a particular order, but I do know that we switched. You know, I was the compliant for so long because I saw the pain that he was causing, and then I switched to be the acting out one. And I see that, I do definitely see that in families.
I did find a link. I did a quick Google search for that book and I put that in the chat for everyone.
Okay.
If anyone wants to look that up, that's, I just picked the Amazon top item, not promoting like that purchase point, but just so everyone has the title and author and everything.
Yeah. A few minutes to type.
Other questions for Zara? Oh, Dawn just said she purchased it. There you go. And got a better deal. Good job.
Feeling really for, you know, when I was doing work with teens, I'd have the group of adopted parents in one room and then the teens separately. And I love this school. It's called the Hyde School. And then they put everybody in one room together. And it was very interesting how the adopted teens would talk quite freely about their parents, you know, when they were identifying with one another. I just feel that groups, just hearing other people say, I feel this about this, is life-changing. And I would urge anyone with a teen, and I know it's not easy to get them to go, but even just showing them things or videos, it's that I thought I was the only person that felt the way that I did, because I'd never met another adoptee and never read a book. And that's very isolating. And I think when you know, oh, wow, they felt this and they got through it. You know, it's good for younger adoptees to see older adoptees and go, oh, they've got to that age, they're living their life, they're okay.
Okay. Any other questions for Zara? We'll put a plug in for our Cleveland participants that we are bringing back our in-person programming for families to get together with their teens, with the teen pullout group as part of that. So look on our website for that. If that's something that would be helpful to your family, we would love to have you join us.
And I was thinking also just of work, you know, there's lots of things that you see people do in their journeys. I think forms of body work have been really helpful as you know, on the journey, because the experience was pre-verbal. The body work, energy work really does do wonders for releasing things. You know, there's talk now that they're using psychedelic drugs to treat mental health. As an addict, I personally can't, even though they say they can treat addiction, for me, that's not a place I can go, because I've done a lot of psychedelics. So you just have to find what's right for you. Because my addict brain will be like, great, I'll go back again next month. Oh, I'll go back the month after. So it's an interesting debate that's going on right now within the addiction world about these drugs that are apparently really helping people with severe mental health stuff. If anyone else has anything to say on these things.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Thank you, Zara, for your talk. I am always so inspired and surprised about how much I relate to these feelings of people that are adopted. And for those that don't know me, I'm a birth mother, and I was a pregnant teenager and in the 60s, and basically was convinced that the best thing I could do for my child was give him up. I mean, coerced, but that's another story. But the rage, the addictions, the lifestyle I lived till about 30 years old was horrifying. And then I found my son. He was 39 years old in 2007, and he was fresh out of prison for lots of drug things. He was a heroin addict, and eventually he did die from heroin overdose in 2020. And rage comes up about that too. And my relationship with him was pretty good, as good as anyone can be with a heroin addict, because it's quite difficult. Sometimes I had to distance myself, but with the help of the group I go to and the adoptees that I got to know, I was really surprised about how much I relate. And I, as far as I know, my parents were my biological parents, but I mean, I hate my birthday, and it just didn't. I mean, there was no cohesiveness in my house, and they never talked about this. Never. I was 14 years old when this happened. I'm 69 now, and they never talked about it. And I feel the same. And I don't remember like using drugs because I'm in this pain. I have to get out of it. I mean, it was pretty much around, if anybody remembers from those times. And I mean, I felt I belonged there until I didn't, until it got really crazy. But I just, identify with the depression, the rage, like I could really kill somebody sometimes. And I'm so glad that I do work a 12-step program that, keeps me from doing any of that. And I do have a relatively serene life despite, everything that has happened, and try to help others and other birth parents and adoptees. And when I see teenagers acting out, I worked in juvenile court for a long time. And again, a lot of adoptees came through juvenile court. I was shocked.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just wanted to thank you, Zara, for your talks. It just reminds me about, this is a club nobody wants to belong to, and the other club is a dead child, a dead son. That's another club nobody wants to belong to. And I'm in that one too. So, and certainly I do talk to other parents that their children have died from drug overdoses and other things, suicide, all kinds of things. But again, thank you. Thank you for, all of these. Thank you, Cleveland. I've been on this before for other reasons, and it's a great resource for everybody. And the questions are really good, to the adopted parents that are really trying to do, the right thing for their son or daughter. Those are really, really good things to know and to do. So thank you. Yeah.
Thanks. I see there's another question. What was included in the work you did after you became sober to heal from your adoption? I think something that I forgot, and I somehow was triggered when Noah was talking, is adoptees can get sober, or people can get sober with trauma, but I'll speak as an adoptee and think, why isn't the program working? Yes, I'm staying sober, but I still have all these feelings. And so it's really important to know that AA and NA is there to address the addiction, and you have to put that down first before you do the other work. It's beneficial if you do, if you can. So not to blame yourself if years later you're still feeling, you know, unsettled, unbalanced, and knowing that it is around this really like PTSD. I suppose the work I've done, and honestly, there's more that I need to do, but I've done a lot of body work stuff, which is really energy body work. I've done a little bit of the tapping, and talk therapy and groups. And also I've developed a spiritual life. I'm not religious, but the spiritual connection that I have developed has really helped me tremendously make sense of all of it. So that's really what works for me. But I definitely feel at different times, like when the grief came up, when I lost my two fathers, the grief was so deep again, I had to do more grief work around it. And I had to realize, I think I've had to accept it doesn't end. I think I always thought when I grow up, I won't be adopted anymore. You know, it'll all go. And what I've learned is all these milestones reignite the adoption experience. And but it's something that lives alongside me rather than consumes me, except obviously when these deaths, they consumed me for a while. And that's hard, you know, I'll be honest, there's some days when I am so sick of this, I don't want it anymore. So I think there's always work to be done. If that answers the question.
There was one more from Sarah. How can I pull fragmented brain and connection to adoption together?
Oh, good. I think that is
Deep
a
one.
lifelong challenge. I mean, I think all the stuff we're talking about is just keep talking about it and doing whatever you find works for you, with the body work, with the tapping. You know, there's this I forget the I'm blanking on the name of it, where you're changing your brain and you're saying these statements. It's like reprogramming us. But I sort of feel that I mean, for me, it is not something that I can tell you has totally healed in me, but it doesn't consume me. And I think just by recognizing it and acknowledging it, you can go, oh, there's the fragmented brain again. Let's be in the moment. You know, let's just try and be in the moment. Yeah, emotional freedom. Yeah. But, you know, I would like to do a lot more of the body work stuff. I find that so beneficial. Sometimes people just doing whatever they do, moving energy around, spinal work, it really works for me. It grounds me. Yoga, I have to exercise. Exercise for me is really important, because I can't ground myself. If I'm not doing any of those things, I'm not as grounded. So I'm not sure I can say, you know, you do one thing and it takes it all away. I sort of feel like it's still something I do to maintain a healthy day. You know, every day I'd be like, oh, I need to move, I need to exercise. And, you know, maybe some people will tell you their brains have been completely healed. Maybe. I haven't met one yet. Although some people, the psychedelics say it has helped. You know, I have heard that. And then there was all this controversy recently with an adoptee. It was quite interesting. I like to observe and see what, you know, people are talking about, really. Thank you.
I'm going to add a link about our search assistance program. And then also I wanted to add a link, if everyone would just take a few moments and fill out a survey regarding the presentation tonight. Let us know if there's any other topics of interest that you'd like to see for us to bring in the future. We're always open to ideas of how we can meet the needs of our group. So I'll
And
put
just
those.
one quick thing I want to say is working with teens or working with therapists, the most beneficial is finding, which is not always easy, a therapist that is adoption specialized. I honestly think it is a waste of time going to people that don't get it, especially at the beginning. I cannot tell you how many therapists that I would see that would ask me so many questions about adoption that I was like, why am I paying you? You should be paying me. But the therapist that I did have at the beginning, I was very lucky when I lived in California. Marley Russell was an adoptee and a, you know, adoption therapist who'd done the work. And that was a life change. There's no point in me trying to, I don't want a therapist that I have to explain stuff to. So I really urge people, don't, you know, they'll say, oh no, but they kind of know a little bit. They need to know a lot. That's just my opinion.
I would agree with that as well. Okay. Well, thank you to everyone that joined this evening. And thank you, Zara, for sharing your wisdom and for volunteering your time with us this evening. As many of you know, Adoption Network Cleveland's a nonprofit organization serving individuals and families impacted by adoption, kinship, and foster care through support, education, and advocacy. To find out more about the organization and to support our work, please visit our website at adoptionnetwork.org. We're a membership organization, and we hope that you'll consider joining as a member. Our next Monday evening speaker series is on October 4th. We hope to see you there or at any of our many other programs that we're offering. Zara, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thanks for all your messages. I'm glad. I hope it was helpful in some way anyway. Lovely to see you all.